I can still taste the bitterness of that moment. The clinking of silverware had stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. My father wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin, leaned back in his chair, and looked directly at me. "You'll always be broke, Aryn." He said it the way someone reads a weather forecast. Certain. Unchangeable. Final. My cousin Bryce stared at his plate. My brother Donovan hid a smirk behind his wine glass. Uncle Terrell chuckled, low and uncomfortable. The sound filled the silence like smoke. "No direction," Dad continued, cutting into his steak with precision. "No discipline. It's just who you are." I kept chewing. The mashed potatoes felt like glue in my mouth, but I forced myself to swallow. My mother studied the tablecloth. Aunt Simone found something fascinating about the wallpaper. No one said a word in my defense. They never did. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was where I'd been just 3 hours before. Sitting across from a loan officer on the 14th floor of Sterling Metro Bank, watching her slide a leather folder toward me. "Once you sign this," she'd said, tapping the document with a manicured finger, "the building is yours." I'd signed it. Drove straight to this dinner. Sat down. Smiled. Pretended nothing had changed. But everything had. I just wasn't ready to show them yet. Welcome to Revenge with Precious, where we share real stories of betrayal, resilience, and the courage to stand up for yourself. These are tales of people who refused to stay silent, who drew boundaries when love turned toxic, and who chose their peace over family obligation. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, these stories are for you. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change how you see your own life. Please, watch till the end. Let's get started. The garage smelled like old motor oil and disappointment. That scent is burned into my memory. I was 12 years old, standing on cold concrete, holding a piece of plywood I'd measured wrong. My father grabbed the tape measure and threw it. Hard. It hit the wall with a crack and clattered to the floor near my feet. "You've got no sense of value," he said, shaking his head like I was a lost cause. "Can't even follow simple instructions." I stood there, gripping the wood, trying to make myself smaller. Trying not to cry. He walked past me without another word, like I was a piece of furniture he'd already decided to throw out. My brother Donovan leaned against the workbench with his arms crossed, watching the whole thing. He didn't defend me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, observing. That day, something clicked in my brain. My father didn't see me as someone capable of learning. He saw me as someone designed to fail. So I stopped trying to change his mind out loud. Instead, I started keeping a list. Every insult. Every dismissal. Every moment he made me feel like I was nothing. I didn't know what I'd do with that list. I just knew forgetting meant accepting. And I wasn't ready to accept his version of who I was. Donovan got a full ride to Weston College, courtesy of Dad. Private university. Business program. Room and board. Everything paid for in full. When the acceptance letter arrived, Dad had it framed. Hung it in his office like it was a diploma itself. I got into community college on scholarships and state grants. When I showed him my acceptance letter, he barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's for poor kids, right?" Mom poured more coffee into her mug and said nothing. She was good at that. Staying silent while he carved pieces off me, one comment at a time. I nodded, grabbed my backpack, and left for my shift at the grocery store. I worked nights stocking shelves, organizing inventory, learning the rhythm of quiet work. I'd come home smelling like cardboard and floor wax. Dad never asked how classes were going. He asked if I was still wasting time or if I'd figured out what real work looked like yet. Donovan graduated with honors. Got hired at a financial consulting firm downtown. Dad sent mass emails with photos. Told everyone at church during announcements. Posted it on social media with the caption "Proud Father Moment." I graduated a semester early with a degree in business logistics. He didn't come to the ceremony. Said he had a vendor meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. I stopped expecting him to show up after that. My first real job was at a small logistics company called Freight Corps. Cramped office. 6 employees. Computers so old they hummed like refrigerators. But I loved it. I was good at finding patterns nobody else noticed. Good at cutting costs. Good at organizing delivery routes that saved time and money. One afternoon, I called Dad. I was excited. Told him about the projects I was managing. About the systems I was building. I asked if he wanted to come see the office. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "Call me when it's a real job, Aryn." The call ended. I sat there in my cubicle, phone still pressed against my ear, listening to dead air. My coworker Xavier glanced over. "You good?" I nodded. Set the phone down. Went back to work. That was the last time I called him about anything that mattered to me. I realized something important that day. He didn't want to see me succeed. He wanted to be right about me failing. So I stopped giving him updates. Stopped asking for his approval. Stopped waiting for him to be proud. I learned to build my life in silence instead. Dad owned a hardware store called Quinlan's Tools and Supply. It sat in a tired strip mall off Route 9, squeezed between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. The rent was high. The sales were inconsistent. He complained about it constantly. "The landlord's bleeding me dry," he'd say at every family gathering. Rent went up twice in 3 years. I'm barely keeping the lights on. I listened carefully. Asked questions. Took mental notes he never noticed. To him, I was just the disappointment daughter pretending to understand business. But I did understand. I wanted to know how commercial real estate worked. How leases were structured. How landlords made their money. How buildings got bought and sold. I started researching online. Found property records. Learned that his building was owned by a company called Hartley Commercial Holdings. They owned 12 properties across the county. Most were struggling to stay occupied. The strip mall where Dad's store sat was barely half full. Empty storefronts with soap-covered windows. Cracked pavement in the parking lot. I saved all that information. Filed it away in my mind. Didn't know yet what I'd do with it. But I knew it mattered. Family gatherings were performances. Carefully rehearsed. Roles assigned. Dad played the proud patriarch. Mom played the devoted wife. Donovan played the golden son who could do no wrong. And I played the background character nobody bothered to introduce properly. "This is Aryn," Dad would say when relatives asked. "The artistic one. Bit of a dreamer. Never the one who rebuilt his entire accounting system for free. Never the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning fixing his messy spreadsheets. Never the one who actually understood how his failing business worked better than he did." At Thanksgiving dinner, he introduced Donovan as my son, the financial analyst. Shook hands with guests. Smiled wide. Donovan absorbed every word like sunshine. When someone asked what I did for work, Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Aryn's still figuring things out. Finding her path, you know." I was 26 years old. I'd been working full-time for 4 years. But in his story, I was still lost. Still wandering. Still waiting to become someone worth mentioning. I stopped correcting him. It was easier to let him believe his own fiction. When I landed a contract managing back-end logistics for a national retail chain, I didn't tell anyone in my family. The pay was solid. The work was challenging. I coordinated shipments across 4 states, optimized delivery schedules, and cut their operating costs by 18% within 6 months. Then Dad called me one Sunday afternoon. His bookkeeping was a disaster again. Invoices were missing. Expenses weren't categorized. Files were corrupted. "Can you take a look?" he asked. I spent 2 full weekends rebuilding his entire system from scratch. Organized everything into clear categories. Set up automatic payment reminders. Created monthly reports so simple even he could understand them. When I finished and showed him the cleaned-up dashboard, he stared at the screen for a moment and said, "That's more like it." No thank you. No acknowledgement of the hours I'd sacrificed. Just a casual nod, like I'd done the bare minimum expected of any decent person. I drove home that night and sat in my parked car for 20 minutes. Hands on the steering wheel. Engine off. Staring at the garage door. That's when I made the decision. I was done working for his approval. From now on, I'd work for myself. And he would never see it coming. I started investing the same month. Small amounts at first. Index funds. Real estate investment trusts. A handful of carefully researched individual stocks. I consumed everything I could find. Read books. Watched tutorial videos. Joined online investment forums. Dad found out somehow. Probably Donovan mentioned it. He called me one evening, voice thick with amusement. "Heard you're playing around with the stock market." "I'm investing," I corrected. He laughed. "You're not built for that kind of thing, Aryn. You'll get scared when the numbers drop and sell too soon. That's what people like you always do. People like you." He said it like a medical diagnosis. Like I was fundamentally incapable of understanding risk or discipline. I didn't argue. Just said, "Maybe you're right. Call me when you learn your lesson," he said, still chuckling as he hung up. I stared at my phone. Opened my investment app. Looked at my portfolio. Then I kept going. Every paycheck, I set money aside. Reinvested dividends. Stayed patient. Stayed disciplined. Stayed quiet. Within 2 years, I'd tripled my initial investment. Within 3, I had enough saved to start thinking much bigger. I applied for a senior logistics coordinator position at a distribution company called Vandermeer Supply. The salary was nearly double what I was making. The interview went extremely well. They were impressed. They called my references. One of those references was my father. I'd listed him because I'd managed his store's finances and thought it demonstrated initiative. That was my mistake. A week later, the recruiter called. Said they were moving forward with another candidate. I thanked her politely and hung up. 3 days after that, she called again. Her voice sounded uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something," she said slowly. "Your father left a voicemail on my office line. He said you weren't emotionally stable. That you struggled with consistency and follow-through." She'd accidentally forwarded the voicemail to me instead of deleting it. I listened to his voice. Calm. Measured. Concerned sounding. Lying. I thanked her for her honesty. Deleted the voicemail from my phone but saved a copy to my computer. That same week, I crossed the financial threshold needed to register a limited liability company. I named it Crescent Vale Holdings. Anonymous. Professional. Nothing that sounded remotely like me. Dad's complaints about rent became louder and more frequent. He said the landlord was impossible to work with. Said his lease renewal was coming up soon and he didn't know if he could survive another rent increase. I asked if I could see the paperwork. He handed it over without a second thought, probably assuming I wouldn't understand it anyway. I photographed every single page. Studied the terms carefully. Noted the lease expiration date. The property owner's contact details. The management company handling renewals. Then I started digging deeper. Hartley Commercial Holdings was quietly liquidating assets. The strip mall where Dad's store sat had been listed for private sale. No public auction. No competitive bidding war. Just direct offers to qualified buyers. I contacted the broker. Explained that I represented an investment group interested in commercial properties. Provided financial statements for Crescent Vale Holdings. My credit score was perfect. My debt-to-income ratio was 0. My investment portfolio was strong and diversified. The broker scheduled a call. We discussed terms. I made an offer. They countered. I accepted without hesitation. 3 weeks later, I sat in a conference room and signed the purchase agreement. The broker shook my hand. Congratulations. You're officially the new owner. I drove home. Ate leftover Chinese food straight from the container. And didn't tell a single person what I'd just done. The first round of official signatures happened in a sterile office with gray industrial carpet and harsh fluorescent lights. I brought my own pen and a bottle of water. The banker, a sharp woman named Colette, walked me through each section of the document with careful precision. This transfers full legal ownership to your company, she explained. All existing tenant leases remain active under their current terms until expiration. I asked about the renewal protocols. She explained the timeline. 60 days before a lease expired, tenants received formal renewal packages. Terms could be renegotiated at that time. Rent could be adjusted to current market rates. Your largest tenant is Quinlan's Tools and Supply, she said, glancing at her notes. Their lease expires in exactly 63 days. I nodded slowly. Signed the final page with steady hands. She stamped the document. The sound echoed through the quiet room like a gavel. I left through the side exit. Sat in my car in the dim parking garage. Ate stale almonds from a vending machine and stared at a concrete support beam. I had just purchased my father's building. The place he'd poured years into. The business he constantly worried about losing. And he had absolutely no idea. 2 weeks passed. Then Mom called. Dad was hosting a family dinner. He had big announcements about the store's future. She said it would mean a lot if I came. I considered saying no. But curiosity won. I wanted to watch him talk about his plans. Wanted to hear him discuss a future I now controlled without knowing it. So I agreed. I wore a plain navy sweater and jeans. Brought an inexpensive bottle of wine. Smiled warmly when I walked through the door. Dad was already holding court in the living room. Clapping Donovan on the shoulder. Laughing about market trends. Aunt Simone asked about my job. I kept my answers vague and short. Dinner smelled like rosemary chicken and misplaced confidence. I sat at the far end of the long table. Quiet. Observing. Waiting. Dad stood at the head of the table like a preacher at a pulpit. Hands spread wide. Voice full of certainty. He talked about the store's future. Said sales numbers were finally climbing. Said he had ambitious plans to expand into power tools, maybe even contractor-grade supplies. I'm in the middle of negotiating a much better lease, he announced proudly. The landlord knows how valuable I am. Can't afford to lose a tenant like me. Donovan nodded along enthusiastically. Uncle Terrell raised his glass. Here's to smart business decisions. Dad's eyes drifted down the table and landed on me. Aryn, you still doing that logistics thing? Yeah, I said simply. Good. Steady work is important for people without natural direction. Bryce snorted into his napkin. Mom studied her food. I took a slow sip of water and said nothing. He launched into a long story about turning down a 6-figure buyout offer years ago. Said he refused because he had principles. Because he wasn't desperate like some people he knew. When he said the word desperate, his gaze lingered on me for just a moment too long. I smiled politely, nodded at the right moments, and thought about the lease renewal package sitting in my email inbox, scheduled to be sent to him in 48 hours. After dinner, I helped Mom load the dishwasher. She scrubbed a casserole dish while I dried plates in silence. "He means well, Aryn," she said quietly. "You know how your father is." I set a plate in the cabinet. "I know exactly how he is. He just wants what's best for you." I turned to look at her. "Does he, Mom?" "Really?" She didn't answer. Just kept scrubbing. Soap bubbles slid down her wrists and dripped into the sink. I dried the rest of the dishes without another word. Before I left, Dad stopped me at the front door. Put a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing okay, right? Financially stable?" "I'm fine," I said. He patted my shoulder awkwardly. "Good. Keep your head down. Work hard. You'll figure life out eventually." I walked to my car. Sat in the driveway with the engine off for 3 full minutes. Then I drove home, opened my laptop, and confirmed the details one more time. The lease renewal package for Quinlan's tools and supply had been officially sent that morning. My father would receive it in his email within 2 business days. The signing meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 in the morning. Colette called to confirm my attendance and ask a final question. "You want to be physically present when he signs?" "Yes," I said. She paused. "You understand this situation might be uncomfortable." "I understand completely." "And you're absolutely certain you want to proceed with standard market terms? No family discount or special consideration?" "Market rate," I confirmed. "Same as any other commercial tenant." She made a note in her file. "All right then. We'll see you Thursday morning." I hung up and stared at my calendar. 3 days until my father walked into that office expecting to negotiate with a faceless corporation. 3 days until he realized the corporation had a very familiar face. I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel vengeful or triumphant. Mostly I just felt exhausted. Like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy for decades and was finally being allowed to set it down. Thursday morning, I dressed carefully. Gray blazer. Black slacks. Simple jewelry. Professional but unremarkable. I arrived 15 minutes early. Colette met me in the building lobby. "He's already here," she said quietly. "Waiting in conference room B. Are you ready?" I nodded. "Let's do this." She led me down a hallway with framed landscape paintings on the walls. Opened a door. Gestured me inside. I sat at the long polished table. Placed my folder neatly in front of me. Folded my hands. Controlled my breathing. The door opened wider. My father walked in with confident strides. He wore a pressed button-down shirt and new khakis. Smiled professionally at Colette. Then he saw me sitting there. The smile died on his face. "Aryn?" "Hi, Dad." He looked at Colette, confused and irritated. "What's going on here?" She gestured calmly to the empty chair across from me. "Please sit down, Mr. Quinlan. Aryn is here representing Crescent Vale Holdings, the new owner of your building." He stood frozen. His eyes moved from me to the folder to Colette and back to me again. "This is some kind of joke," he said flatly. "It's not," I replied quietly. He sat down slowly. Like the chair might collapse beneath him. Colette placed the lease renewal document on the table in front of him. Her voice remained calm and professional. Standard commercial terms. Market rate rent adjustment based on comparable properties in the area. 60-day advance notice required for any major renovations or structural modifications. He stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Then he looked up at me. You bought the building. I did. When? About a month ago. His jaw muscles tightened visibly. And you didn't think to tell your own father? You didn't think to tell me when you called my potential employer and said I was emotionally unstable. The room went completely silent. Colette shifted slightly in her chair. Dad's face went pale, then flushed dark red. That was a misunderstanding, he said through clenched teeth. It was deliberate sabotage, I corrected calmly. And it's on a voicemail recording I still have saved. He looked away. His hands curled into fists on top of the table. I slid the lease document closer to him. The terms are fair and standard. The same rent increase every other tenant in the building is receiving. If you want to keep your store, sign it. If you don't, you have 60 days to vacate the property. His eyes snapped back to mine. You would actually do this to your own father? I held his gaze without blinking. You already did it to your own daughter. He read every single word of that lease. It took nearly 15 minutes. Colette sat patiently. I watched him, searching for any hint of remorse or recognition. Any crack in his armor. There was nothing. Finally, he picked up the pen. Signed his name in sharp, angry strokes. The ink looked violent against the white paper. He stood abruptly. Didn't look at me. Didn't thank Colette. Just walked toward the door with stiff shoulders. He stopped with his hand on the handle. Turned halfway back. I always knew you were cold inside, he said. And I always knew you were cruel, I replied evenly. He left. The door clicked shut with finality. Colette let out a long, slow breath. That was incredibly intense. I nodded. Started gathering my folder and papers. Thank you for handling everything professionally. She handed me a copy of the freshly signed lease. For what it's worth, I think you handled that situation with remarkable grace. I managed a small smile. I've had a lot of practice staying calm when people hurt me. Word spread through the family with shocking speed. Aunt Simone called just 2 days later. Is it true? She asked without preamble. Yes. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said something I never expected. It's about time someone stood up to him. I almost dropped my phone. What? He's been terrible to you for years, Aryn. We all saw it happening. Nobody said anything because we're cowards. I'm genuinely sorry for that. I sat down slowly on my couch. You knew? All this time? We all knew, she admitted quietly. But your father is loud and stubborn and frankly intimidating. Nobody wanted to cause family drama or take sides. So you just watched him destroy me. She sighed heavily. We did. And that was deeply wrong. I'm glad you're finally standing up for yourself. You deserve so much better than how he's treated you. I hung up feeling strangely hollow. It wasn't just him. It was everyone. They'd all watched. They'd all known. And they'd all chosen comfortable silence over protecting me. Dad stopped mentioning my name at family gatherings entirely. When distant relatives or friends asked about his store's landlord situation, he'd say vaguely, just some investment company. Donovan called once. His tone was cold and judgmental. You really did that to Dad? I did. That's incredibly cold, Aryn. So was sabotaging my career by lying to my employer. He hung up without another word. I didn't call back. Didn't feel the need to explain or defend myself anymore. Mom left a voicemail that I listened to once. I really wish you'd handled this whole situation differently, honey. I deleted it without responding. I was finished explaining myself to people who'd already decided I was wrong. I'd spent years justifying my existence to a family that had collectively decided I wasn't worth believing in. Now I was done performing for an audience that never applauded. 3 months passed quietly. Then something unexpected arrived in my email. Dad's store had won a local small business renovation grant. $5,000 for property improvements and updates. The grant paperwork required official landlord approval before any work could begin. The approval form came directly to me. I stared at it for a long time. Thought about all the ways I could make this difficult for him. Delay the approval process. Add unnecessary conditions. Require multiple inspections. But that wasn't the point of any of this. The point was never revenge. It was freedom. Freedom from his voice living permanently inside my head. Freedom from his version of who I was supposed to be. I signed the approval form that same afternoon. Scanned it. Sent it back through official channels. No attached note. No explanation. No conditions. Just my signature on the line where it belonged. Months continued passing. The store stayed open and operational. Rent payments arrived on time every month without fail. I hired a professional property management company so I wouldn't have to interact with him directly. I focused my energy on growing Crescent Vale holdings. Purchased 2 additional commercial properties. Smaller buildings in better condition. Fixed them up carefully. Raised their market value. Learned how to manage tenants who weren't connected to my childhood trauma. My investment portfolio grew steadily. My confidence grew with it. I started sleeping through the night without nightmares. Stopped flinching every time my phone rang. One random Tuesday morning, I woke up and realized something startling. I hadn't thought about my father in 3 entire days. It felt like sunlight finally breaking through dense fog. I ran into him by accident at a gas station 6 months later. We both reached for the same fuel pump at the exact same moment. He stepped back quickly. Aryn. Dad. We stood there in awkward silence. 2 people who used to be family. Who used to share a last name and a dinner table and a history. The store's doing well, he said finally. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I'm glad to hear that. He nodded. Looked down at his shoes. Scuffed the concrete with his boot. I didn't mean some of the things I said to you over the years. Yes, you did, I said calmly. He looked up and met my eyes. For the first time in my entire life, he looked genuinely small. Tired. Almost fragile. Maybe I did, he admitted quietly. I finished pumping my gas. Closed the fuel cap. Hung up the nozzle. I hope the renovations turn out well, I said. Then I got in my car and drove away. Didn't look in the rearview mirror. Didn't feel the need to watch him disappear behind me. A full year after I bought the building, I sat in my own private office. Not a cramped cubicle anymore. An actual office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a door that locked from the inside. Crescent Vale Holdings now owned 5 commercial properties across 2 counties. The revenue stream was stable and growing. I'd hired a part-time assistant. Started mentoring young investors who reminded me of who I used to be. I kept the original lease renewal notice from Dad's store framed on my wall. Not displayed as some kind of trophy. Just as a quiet reminder. Broke people don't sign property leases. Quiet people aren't automatically weak. And silence is never the same thing as surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. I never told him the complete story. Never sat him down and explained exactly how I built everything from nothing. Never asked for his pride or his approval or his recognition. Because I finally understood something fundamental. I didn't need any of those things anymore. I thought about that family dinner sometimes. His words still echoed occasionally. You'll always be broke. But I wasn't angry when I remembered. I was free. I drove past his store sometimes when I was in that part of town. Saw the lights on inside. Saw customers walking in and out with bags and tools. I was genuinely glad it survived and continued operating. Not for him. For the employees who depended on those paychecks. But I never stopped to go inside. Never waved through the window. Just kept driving forward. Because the girl who desperately needed him to finally see her had grown into a woman who didn't need to be seen anymore. She just needed to be free. And finally, quietly, completely, she was. The building deed sat in my safe deposit box. The lease payments arrived like clockwork. And I built a life he would never understand because he'd never bothered to truly know me. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove their worth to people who've already decided they're worthless. I stopped trying. Started building instead. And that made all the difference. Thank you for watching this story. If moments like these resonate with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over people who couldn't see you, then you're not alone. We share stories like this every single day, real accounts of people who found their voice, set their boundaries, and walked into the life they deserved. Subscribe so you never miss next upload, and share your own story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Compliment of the season. I love you all.